right, should be a good show tonight. We'll have Rock and Ran on. Look, I don't have the time or really the desire to know every detail about all this. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a college football fan, but I mean, this is going to determine what the future of the sport looks like coming up. So we'll get started around 8:30. Hope you guys are having a fantastic, what is it, Tuesday night? Tuesday's gone with the wind. And by the way, if you're a tech fan, I do have an interview set up. It won't be live, but it'll probably go out next week with the owner, creator of Section 103. So be looking out for that too. It should be interesting. They just launched some LSU stuff too. Oh, okay. House is a person. Okay. I wasn't smart enough for that joke. I do love House, though. You know, anytime you have a drug addict doctor that just coincidentally is always correct in the most bizarre way possible. It's always zebras and never horses. And it's also never lupus, from what I remember. I also like how they just break the law. Like they just break into people's houses to diagnose them in like every episode. I don't see how that's a sustainable medical practice, but hey, it's a show, I guess. Also, they always have foremen break into the houses, which is a little head scratching. You couldn't have the lady do it. What was the Australian guy? He got done dirty. That girl, was it Cameron? Carmen asked him to propose to her. She's like, propose to me now, and he does, and then she just leaves him, leaves the whole show. It's probably the most realistic thing in that show. I will say, though, 13, my God, 13 was something else. Let's say we just get into it. Let's put a stop to this. Let me pull this up. Let's bring on Rock and Rant and switch screens here. What's going on, Rock? You're live here, so I'm glad you don't have your shirt off or anything. What's going on, buddy? Can you hear me? Oh, I don't have my... Now you can hear me. Everyone else could hear me. You couldn't. What's going on, buddy?
What's going on, man? How are you?
As Pigskin Pete says, I'm amazing and fantastic. Or as Dave... What does Dave Ramsey say? Better than I deserve. Also brandished a loaded weapon in a meeting. But anyways, not the topic of this video.
I mean, it is legal, so we're sort of somewhere.
Yeah, is it legal to just bring a loaded weapon to work if you own the company? I guess so. So let's talk about legality. So real quick, I'm just going to go over what an ignorant person like me knows, which is not much. Before we came on the show, I said, look, I don't have the time or the interest to go into every detail of this. I'm a college football fan, but I do have to pay attention to it because it's kind of like your wives. Like you're not always interested, but you need to be listening in case there's a quiz later. So there's three big things I see in this. One, back pay for previous NCAA athletes. I don't remember the time frame that
I
qualifies
think
for
it's
that.
2016 to 2024, or give or take a year. I think it's 2016 to 2024-ish, essentially. But it could be a year off. But it's, if you know, hey, if you got shafted and you could have got a big deal in 2008, I don't know, like here's some free tickets to the next game.
Is there a reason for that time frame of like why that? It seems oddly specific. I don't remember either, but I
Yeah.
know it's not like
I honestly don't remember either. I know that there was some from even like longer ago, and I think, some part of the conversation might have been just about waiting way too long kind of thing. But what made somebody 1 year possible and another year not, or maybe 1 year back eligible but 3 years of their college career not, that part I actually have heard the answer for that. But in the hell of all of this crap between realignment and this over the last years or two, my both disdain and fascination has like moved that out of my brain power to remember on a quick ask.
yeah, no, I mean, of all the things that are important, that's really not one of them. I mean, it's important if you're getting screwed, but I'm not getting screwed, so I don't care. No direct NIL payments after July 1st. Now, I also think
We'll define what that means. No direct NIL payments.
I don't think it's well defined. I take it to mean you have to go through this clearinghouse. Like let's say I have $200 million in the bank. I can no longer directly pay an athlete. Is my understanding of that? Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding. It is also extremely likely to be one of, if not the first lawsuits that starts of this, right? So in theory, name, image, and likeness for an athlete could be directed through a collective, but actually now moved in-house, so basically run by the school, which gives them more control and understanding and probably some more security. But it's not out of the question. There could still be an external collective. There are issues about anything that's touching a booster, right, regardless of where it is, and additional scrutiny. And there's nothing that says that Pepsi can't go to Arch Manning at Texas. I mean, just using one of the more obvious people who have truly probably have a name, image, and likeness brand worth millions at this point, even though they've only played a few games on the field. Pepsi could go to Arch Manning, his agent, and cut a direct deal. I think a lot of Quinn Ewer stuff was like that before in Texas time. And in theory, those deals, anything above $600 needs to go to the clearinghouse, NIL Go, because that's how you name anything. You just put whatever name it is and add Go, and that means that you've thought it through. The issue, I think, is some companies somebody's going to challenge it just to challenge it, right? An agent of, why does a independent party who has nothing to do with this lawsuit and does a lot of influencer work, because essentially name, image, and likeness is advertising influencer work, right?
Right.
Why do I need to let anybody, even if it's not going to be disclosed, anybody know my deal? I don't need to do that for, famous TikTok star. I don't need to do that for Patrick Mahomes. Why do I need to trust that somebody at Deloitte, and my accounting firm is not Deloitte, it's one of the other big three, because I'm a big company. Why do I want to do that? So I think somebody's possibly going to challenge that at some point, but we don't know that.
For sure. And let me back up for a second. It's just like, okay, what is the lawsuit? We're talking about the settlement, but what even was the lawsuit? I think this was it 2021 or 2020, somewhere in that time frame it was filed?
Yeah, this was basically players getting compensated for having been prohibited from monetizing their own name and image and likeness in rules that the NCAA had in place that basically were legally not permissible, right, essentially. Yep. And so this settlement is $2.8 billion in back pay to a class of athletes across sports over the time period that's going to be paid out over the next 10 years, basically derived from NCAA tournament credit kind of revenue, right? So the schools are taking a hit there. They're paying it out over 10 years. And as part of that settlement, then they've also put together these go forward things, of which revenue sharing, which we can talk to whatever degree, the $20.5 million, how that came about, is a part of the go future settlement, which also hits into possible potential lawsuit and other legal challenges to come.
Yeah. I made you a moderator, Rock and Rant. So you can post a link to your channel like College Football Express. I know you do some stuff with Flow. Rock and Rant, he's also part of College Football Mafia. This is more what they do and not me. That's why Rock and Rant is on here. Rock and Rant's a good dude. Of everyone that talks about conference realignment a lot, he's the one I respect the most. So that's why he's on here.
That.
Yeah, it's also a class action lawsuit, and I used to think that meant like, oh, it's very serious if it's class, like that had something to do with how egregious the law had been broken or something. It doesn't. Class action just means you're grouping a bunch of different people with grievances into a single lawsuit. So if me and 200 other people have been screwed over by some insurance company, instead of litigating 200 different lawsuits, they just lump it into one lawsuit. Obviously, you would overwhelm the legal system if you didn't have this. And it, from what I've read, it is between the Power 5 conferences. This was who was represented, and the NCAA. Or am I wrong there?
Well, it's not just the Power 5 conferences. It's, a number of schools, including what's known as the G6, are all party to this.
Okay.
So it's a wider thing, even though probably most of the actual players who had the highest monetary value in theory might have come from the Power 5 conferences, but just by definition of the fame and stature of those programs and the athletes that were around there. But Boise State is part of this settlement just as much as Ohio State is.
Right. So we will.
They don't all have to do the same thing. They don't have to spend up to $20.5 million in revenue sharing, but they're all going to be adhering to NIL Go, whether it's like your local donut shop at $601 for your deal, or Nick Saban Motors deal for some player in Alabama.
Right. That's my next point. So yeah, no direct NIL payments. We're going to talk about this, and this is post July 1st, but I think there was a June 30th date or something too. Like you had to start reporting above $600.
Actually, it's theoretically this week. NIL Go is supposed to be alive and well, and all future NIL deals are supposed to go there. July 1st is the date that, in theory, the revenue sharing portion, which is distinct from NIL deals, even though ultimately it's pay and not pay for play, because God forbid we actually call it what it really is. But that NIL Go is supposed to be live Wednesday, Thursday this week. There was a lot of speculation that many/all schools got a lot of last-minute NIL deals in prior to Friday of last week, prior to midnight, whatever semantics. Like one of those days, a lot of people got their deals in earlier this year so that they could, front load certain players and maybe have more room to play with for future players, recruits that they got them really great NIL deals. So the revenue sharing portion of what they might give them in the future could be diminished, but the entire collective package might have been really good for them.
Yeah, and just really quick, so I do think this is the thing most likely to be challenged, is this NIL deal, which sucks because it's the most important thing. Because I think for me as a college football fan, NIL was always supposed to be like between a business and the player. Like if Nike, Adidas wants to sponsor someone, the intention wasn't for me or you to pay them, but we'll see moving forward. Also, this 600, and I don't want to get into politics, let me be clear, but this $600 number comes up a lot, and I don't know why. It came up with reporting things in your bank account in some years past, and then I don't know why $600.
I believe it is still. I think it's fairly arbitrary but it is based in some fact of like that's the amount of money that you need to start reporting things to the IRS. Okay. From both sides of the equation, right? Like theoretically, you're supposed to declare whatever you're supposed to declare for your taxes, and now we're definitely getting out of my strongest suit of that. But that's what it's tied to in theory. That was where that number came from, according to a couple of the more accounting type people that I know.
WreckTalk paid no taxes on the channel last year, and that's not because I'm a tax cheat. I spend a lot of money. I spend more money than I make on the channel is why that's the case.
I can attest, streaming to do it well, and what YouTube pays for you definitely eats up a lot of that. So all that super chats and things you guys do for WreckTalk is offsetting costs more likely rather than having him figure out what vehicle he's buying from Nick Saban Motors.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right, so the next point you were talking about, $20.5 million in revenue share. Now, this is directly from the school to the athlete, which is another, I think, and you might disagree, most likely challenge to this. So they laid out some expected numbers of like 75% to football, 5% to men's basketball. It surprised me if they mentioned a women's sport at all in this, but they said 5% to women's basketball and then 5% to any other sport. And I just see, and maybe you know more about this being a Title IX issue for, any government entity, educational entity. Seems like a Title IX issue.
Yeah, I think there's a big question on all of that, right? And there was a big question without going into politics and what you like or not, but like politics does come in play here, specifically about Title IX. So 20.5 million was basically an average. They basically did a calculation of everybody who is as big as Ohio State to the smallest school that's part of this settlement from their direct revenue sources, not including booster money. So your ticket sales, your media deal, how much merch you sell, a bunch of other ancillary things, right? And then they came up with like, here's the average revenue per school. So some schools far exceeded it, some completely a lot lower. And they came up with 22% is the percentage that they came to. I'm sure there was a rationale there that I just also don't remember. And the end result is for the first year, it's set at $20.5 million. And then a school can decide whether their scholarship costs, the scholarship, room and board, are subtracted from that up to a limit, or added, that you can just do it outside and not count it against. So you'd have more revenue to share. And they're all doing it a different way. We don't really know yet how they're all going to distribute in terms of, are they purely going to sit there and say that these schools generated this percentage of these sports, generated this percentage of the revenue pie, and we're just straight pass through to them, right? Which would make it extremely in favor of football if you have both programs, in favor of basketball, men's basketball, if you're, St. John's or Gonzaga, maybe UConn, but I know they have football. But
yeah.
So then you have that question of like, okay, so is that a Title IX issue or not? Because you're like, the NBA makes a lot more money than the WNBA. That's not a Title IX issue, regardless of the fact that
they don't get federal money though.
Right. I'm just saying, like, it's not discriminate, but it's not discrimination in the workplace kind of thing, right? Because that's the business, even if the business is in that position because of a history of things, right?
Sure.
In education, it's different, right? And there was Title IX. The question is, in a world where the current administration is potentially dismantling the Department of Education, which is the chief advocate for this kind of thing, along with the other couple of areas that also are under potential changes. Are they going to even try to enforce that? Or are they going to sit there and say it's purely a math problem? If you choose to give your allocation based off of the revenue that school does, we are not going to think it's discrimination. We're not going to think it's Title IX. As long as you still have access to sports and there's scholarships for a balance on women's sports versus men's sports, which we've all seen happen over years as that has been evened out, and some schools have lost men's teams and propped up and got additional women's teams. That's the question. And the answer to that question of whether it is or isn't a problem might be very different for the next 3 years than it might be in 4 years, right? With different administrations, different policies, different ways of dealing with the department. I also think it might be, and this is just me talking, like I don't have any inside information on this, but is a school like Stanford going to do it differently because they just think as a university differently? I've used this thing of, hey, the Olympics are coming into California in 2028, right? U.S. Does a school that has a really big Olympics program want to give more revenue sharing to sports that are quote unquote non-revenue because they want to attract the best divers and swimmers to their program, so that in 2028, if somebody steps onto the medal stand, they're like, WreckTalk, diving, Georgia Tech, right? And they'll have that value, even though while you were a diver at Georgia Tech, it didn't matter.
Yeah, this gets very complicated because one of the things that was critical to, it seems, at least the NCAA and probably the Power Five too, if I had to guess, was that they basically demanded that they are not classified as employees. And I think that
Right.
throws a wrinkle in all of this too. Even with the NIL stuff, like, okay, you can't put a cap on. You'll see this comment on every one of these videos. Well, you can't put a cap on this. Well, if they're not employees, I don't. I think it makes it more complicated. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. All of this is more complicated because nobody wants to just deal with the elephant in the room of what's really happening, right? Because of the ramifications of that. Like if you could agree that they're employees, and you could have unions, you could do collective bargaining, and then you could have salary caps that are not that are collectively bargained. Everyone's agreed to it. You're not worrying about antitrust legislation. You don't need Congress to necessarily deal with that aspect for them. Or you do need them to help out, so you can do those kind of situations. All of this is a problem of people not wanting to just like call something what it is. So you have Frankenstein solutions made up of all these like different Lego blocks from different sets that don't really fit together to build the solution. But you're hoping it looks close enough that someone's like, "Hey, good job! You did a great job with that one."
Well, so you can call it amateurism still. I don't know why we've held on to that, but
you can call it promature. I don't know, like whatever the hybrid of pro and amateur is. Like I don't really know. It's whatever. You're half pregnant, which is like, how is that even possible?
Also, shout out to C-Dog. He just announced on his channel on the ACC show he's expecting to have a baby soon. So go congratulate C-Dog on his channel.
Congratulations, C-Dog.
Also, I had a bone to pick with you. You brought up Pepsi. This is an Atlanta show, so we're not talking about Pepsi.
Yeah, I was just trying to trigger all of my. I lived in Atlanta twice. I know where all this stuff is. I know where the world of Coke is, so it's cool.
And as much as I love Diet Coke, the world of Coke sucks. It's a waste of money. Yeah. I'm just gonna let you know that now.
Absolutely, yeah. Most of the flavors are not in America for a reason.
Well, it's incredibly expensive, and yeah, you get to. There's 1,000 different flavors for you to try, and that's about it. My daughter, who's 5, was like, "Can we go? This is dumb." But anyway,
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, so we've gone through that. That's kind of the big 3 things. Look, all of this is more complicated. It's like when you take a physics class and your teacher's like, "This is the ideal scenario." In practice, it's way more complicated than this. Now. Something else I did want to talk about is this SCORE Act that's being thrown around. So maybe we should back up and say what's different now than before? Because before everyone got sued into oblivion. Well, what's different now? I think. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that what's happened is we've poured this really solid foundation for new lawsuits to be built upon.
Sure.
Right? They've settled this one thing. There's a possible appeal of that settlement, right? There are people who could try to get that thrown out, and then there's this whole other world of possible but not certain lawsuits built on the ramifications of what this is.
Yes, I agree with that. I think and this is where politics does come in some for me. Now you have the support of the people with power, being the Power Five and some of these powerful schools, into this agreement. Now, that doesn't prevent lawsuits from coming in. I do think that might influence the results of those lawsuits, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, listen, if they actually pass some degree of legislation, it may nullify the claims within any one of a number of lawsuits, but not necessarily remove every single lawsuit from the situation, right? Like it all could still wind up being an issue that they have to go through and deal with. But if they get legislation that, can help solve with the revenue share cap, as an example, right? If they get good legislation, they'll get some protection for athletes in high school in college who have some really bad rogue agents who don't have to register with anyone and are giving, taking commissions far in excess of what an agent in the NFL would do.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw that video. Safety for Clayton, for Georgia Tech, Clayton Powell-Lee, basically let ESPN be a fly on the wall for what his process was in the portal. And
Oh wow.
I think it's A&P Sports Agency. I could be wrong. Out of Texas represents him. Who I don't know if you know who writes the contracts for him. And because I know you, you probably know who this guy is. Tony Busby writes the contracts for those athletes. But yeah, they take 5 to 8, 9 times what is allowed by the NFL. The NFL cap is 3% on contracts. Now, other things are a little different,
Higher, yeah.
but they said the quiet part out loud. And a lot of people, I think, look at this as like the athletes versus everyone else or something. The truth is,
Right.
we could get some protections for athletes. A&P, and I can't believe they said this, they during the portal periods look to make $1 million a day off of their commissions on contracts. And I did
That's
some math.
unreal.
If we just assume, I assumed about $400,000 per NIL contract. I don't know how reasonable that is, but that would be
That's pretty high per contract, because you start getting to some, your average player is not necessarily getting that for a contract, but there's definitely players getting that, right? But you're talking about your cream of the crop.
well, and I wanted to overcompensate just to be able to say, if you assume that, that's 17 contracts per day. It's like 16.6, but in other words, you have agents that are taking advantage of these kids, in my opinion. But anyways, so let's talk
There are
about.
definitely agents taking advantage of kids. There's like no question about that. There's agents that have taken advantage of NFL players even within the, the constraints of the Players Association and having to register, outside of the actual percentage they might have gotten on a contract. It's
On
just
endorsements,
worse. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, I hate to see that. But the other big thing is there's this legislation. I think there's 2 pieces of legislation. Honestly, I think a lot of the people who are quote unquote experts writing on this stuff don't fully understand it, just from kind of the contradictory reporting. But there's the SCORE Act that has been proposed by U.S. Representatives Lisa McClain, Janelle Bynum, a bunch of other ones. It's a bipartisan bill. If you don't know what bipartisan means, because you don't care about politics like a bunch of people, it just means both parties supporting it for the most part. But here are some points, and we'll go through them. One point listed as NIL right. So it says codifies the right of college athletes to receive compensation in their name, image, and likeness, and prohibits the NCAA and schools from penalizing student athletes from NIL activity. And this is what I wanted to ask you about, because in the settlement, you have this college football commission that is supposed to be kind of the lightning rod, it seems like, of imposing this. Does that strike that down? Does that do away with NIL Go, basically?
I don't know if it does or not, because I guess it depends upon what the fine print after that top level. So it's not necessarily contradicting it, but it could contradict it if they're essentially saying if I want to sponsor, DJ Lagway, which I would never want to, but let's just say I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give him like $1 gazillion to come to one signing. That should theoretically be rejected by NIL Go. Right? Because there's no reasonable expectation of that. Forget about my ability to pay for it. But if depending upon their line in that thing, that might make it moot. But it might also just be like, you have the right to do it, but we are subject to this. Like, we need to know the fine details of the bills. And as you know, many of our congressional representatives on both sides of the aisle seem to vote for things that they never actually had they or their staff fully read by the time they vote.
Yeah, this is true. This is where we're going to need some details, because you're going to have some sort of enforcement of, like, you can't have rules without enforcement. Rules without enforcement are not rules. They're guidelines. So we'll have to get some more information on that. It says extended academic access. And I'm like, Mike, I haven't heard academics brought up in college football since Reggie Ball didn't get to play a bowl because he failed whatever project. But anyways, allows student athletes to use their scholarships to compete for a degree within 10 years, even if they leave the school early. So I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, as it reads, no matter where they go, you got to let them come back and complete their degree. But then the undertone for that to me is, what does that say about eligibility?
Yeah, I mean, it says to me that if you're a junior and you leave because you have draft prospects and your NFL career is shortened, a lot of schools let you finish or come back and get your scholarship and
Yes.
take it in if it's like 7 or 8 years later. But not every school does that. So I guess they're basically codifying it for, and we'll just keep the conversation on football because it's the main subject of all of the things we talk about. The average player who actually even gets to the NFL, which is not most college football players, has a career of like 4 years, give or take. So even those, some who are drafted extremely high. So I think it's interesting that they're at least making sure that you have that path, so that if your NFL or whatever sport career doesn't work out, your all those billions of dollars that you were a part of making come back to you to finish out your degree in due time. So that's interesting. Now, whether or not that plays out with eligibility, that's a whole other conversation because currently we're getting mixed reviews on that from different court cases. Some junior college guys are getting 5th and 6th years of eligibility. There was a case just the other day. Was it North Carolina State? One of their cornerbacks or safeties, he just lost his case, appealing for an extra year of eligibility on the hardship case level based off of family circumstances for a 5th year. So I think that's also a very gray area, and how that ultimately maps up to this bill will be interesting. But I did not see anything about your eligibility side of it yet. I
Okay.
did see some of the details you're talking about.
Okay. And here's another very interesting thing, because they demand they're not employees, but they get a lot, if not almost all of the protections employees do in this bill. So it says health and life skills education, but that, ignore that. Medical protections require schools to cover medical cost of sports related injuries for at least 2 years after the athlete leaves the institution, which is also interesting because this very topic is the genesis of the NCAA. I think there was it for Texas A&M? A kid basically had a career-ending injury, life-altering injury, and then their college football was like, well, he's not an employee, so figure it out. Don't know what to tell you.
Right. Yeah, it's nuts. Like, all that stuff is good. I mean, those might be the things that bridge the gap to solving this on different sides of the aisle or the issue, right? The ones that are leaning more towards in favor of the schools, the state institutions, those are more in favor of the player rights. It's going to have, like, people have to eventually learn again that in a democracy, in a twisted Congress of votes, you kind of have to like do some compromises here. And I don't really think the whole college football and college sports thing is very necessarily automatically clear partisan one way or the other, because you have different representations. But one way or the other, no one's going to get all they want if you're going to get something in Congress. So hopefully you get something that makes everybody a little unhappy, but generally okay. If they finally do this hearing that you were referring to on, I think, one part of the two bills that are there on Thursday morning is the 13th congressional hearing since since NIL came into existence in some form of the way that we are sadly familiar with.
Yeah. Polyduck says, "Who the f is this? This is your daddy. Your mama just didn't tell you." So next one.
I'm another dummy. You can just use AI. You don't have to listen to what I'm saying.
Rock and Rant's great. It's another interesting one. Scholarship scrutiny. So basically, you cannot cut someone's scholarship based on like athletic performance, injury. Well, what even does it say? Even whether they leave the institution. Anyways, this had been a dirty secret of college football for some time. When Paul Johnson took over at Georgia Tech, obviously he runs a totally different offense. So we interviewed a guy on the channel that's a 2009 ACC champion. Joe Gilbert played guard for that team and basically said, yeah, I mean, they would basically tell you without directly telling you, you need to hit the portal. Like, you're not going to play. We're cutting you.
Absolutely. I mean, scholarships weren't for many players were 1-year renewables too, right? So
yeah, even things like gray shirting, right? We're kind of another dirty secret where like, yeah, we got our scholarship for you in recruiting. Actually, we found someone better. You can come enroll at your own cost, and maybe we'll have one for you later. Don't worry. So I actually like this because that is messed up how certain athletes were dealt with in the old system for sure.
yeah, I mean, they should have. Look, there should be some basic codes, things you need to adhere to, but because they thought you were a 5-star and you turned into a 1-star, I don't think that should necessarily, you're already not going to play. So you shouldn't lose your scholarship. If you're an academic scholarship receiver, usually you just have to keep like your minimum GPA, right? But if you didn't turn into a 4.0 student that came across with some invention and could be Nobel Prize worthy as an undergrad, you don't lose your scholarship.
That's a good point. Like up until, and we'll see how this goes, like me as a student at Tech had infinitely more rights than an athlete did. Even me having this channel, like if I was a player, I would not be able to have a YouTube channel because I would get ad revenue and that would be against the rules. So
correct. Yeah. At one point that was 100% true.
Crazy.
Which is why we have that settlement, right?
Yeah. And I say that because there's kind of two camps of people. There's people that are like, there can be no restrictions. And then there's people that are like, we got to go back to the way it was. And the way it was didn't work. And the people that are saying that you just can't restrict anything, they're both equally wrong for different reasons. I don't know how you feel about that, but
look, at the end of it, there's decades worth of restricting people's income, and everyone's always cool with somebody else's income being restricted, just not mine.
yeah.
Ultimately, that's the great American way, right? But I also understand people who are like, the pendulum has gone way too far the other side, where people are boomeranging in and out of the portal twice in 5 months, essentially, and getting that check. And that's also not really the intent of what, if this sport's going to survive and take care of whoever is in it in any way, shape, or form, with the fandom and the level of interest they have to do to generate that revenue, they're all going to have to figure out a way to make it work in a way that doesn't completely alienate everyone. That's not just in the it just means more conference, right? Ultimately.
Yes. We talked about it, agent oversight. So you're going to have to register, like you're going to have some sort of vetted qualifications, which needs to happen yesterday. Like, good.
No, it's like yesterday, but it also, the next thing, you got Texas creating a law that says that like 17-year-olds can sign deals with schools with,
not just
in their
Texas.
state. So
Georgia already has that.
So how are you, how does that even map up to all of this as well?
I would think, and that's the last point on here, like creating a national standard overriding state law, you'd have to have a federal law that probably acts as high school kids getting played, or greatly limits it or holds it to the same standard as college. I mean, and that's a whole other thing. Now, I'm certainly not some federal judge or federal prosecutor, but this is where it gets interesting. I do think, like, when you sue the federal government or attempt to, they have to agree to that. You can't just out of the blue sue the federal government. I think there's some things that they have to.
There are some specific things around lawsuits against the federal government, and I would be an idiot if other than to say I agree that I know that those exist and what they are. Call 1-800-ATTORNEY.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just saying, I don't know. I know that's a thing. So I don't know how that plays into it or how any of that will be used. But I think there were about 100 different questions or not more that we need answered in this. And it probably answers 2.5. Like, that's probably your foundation.
Look, I mean, it provides until we get either an overturned case or other cases to go through, or somehow they put this on pause for everyone heading into this season, and probably through what recruits is your school getting and what terms are they having to operate for the 2026 recruiting class, because just the way courts do, or even if they miraculously pass legislation that, Republicans and Democrats can agree upon to the point that 60 senators approve it and get it passed, plus the simple majority in the House. These are probably the rules we're playing with for at least one cycle, right? Anything could happen. What do I know when it's all said and done? But just this case took us years to get through, right? Yep. These other things are in place in the next few weeks, and schools are reacting to them. They're all signing. They're part of this other alliance as opposed to the the Big Ten, ACC, Pac-12 famous alliance. That they're all going to adhere to these rules regardless of the different state laws. That's happening right now. They're seeing the rollout of this platform, how fast it's going to go. There's like 90 athletic directors in meetings right now as we speak. So in the same way that if you're an NFL fan, we all know what legal tampering is and what an undrafted free agent might be, or all these other business aspects of the NFL. Like, these are the new business aspects we're dealing with in college football, whether we like them or not. So even if you hate this and all you really want to know is if your defense is playing, what kind of are they mainly a 3-4, 4-3, or something else? This is going to impact how the players that get onto the field for you, at least for a while, and are on the field for you this year, are operating.
I think it depends. The only thing that could change that, and I do think this will happen, is particularly with the NIL thing. Someone will file a lawsuit and they'll file an injunction, meaning, hey, we can't wait for this to be litigated, because by the time it's litigated, I can't be made whole. So I need an injunction that says I'm not beholden to this until my case is settled or whatever.
100% possible, and then we'll find out whether is the injunction being applied just to that case, or is it being applied to whatever that federal district, that federal circuit, or is it being applied nationwide, right? I thought that actually Judge Wilkin, who settled the House v. NCAA, I thought that there was a possibility that she might have approved the settlement but stayed its implementation pending appeal. That didn't happen, so I'm wondering if that's like an indication of what might happen elsewhere. But those other cases that we don't know about but expect will happen could be filed in any number of state or federal courts, depending upon the nature of them and how an individual judge sees it. It is very subject to interpretation of that judge.
This is true. So I guess looking forward to what this means for the immediate future. We kind of talked about that, but there are schools that are not opting into this. What does that mean for those schools as opposed to the ones that do opt in for 2025?
I mean, if they're not opting in, they can't do revenue share, right? Like, essentially. They can still be playing sports, but they can't revenue share. So think about if you're a school in any conference in FBS, right? Whether you're Power 4, G5, G6, whatever an acronym you want to use, and you're recruiting against any other school that's close to you as a peer, let alone somebody higher, and you don't have that, and especially if you're recruiting players, even for a big team that may not have that brand notoriety, to get a name, image, and likeness deal, what's going to happen there? If you're already in the program and you find out that your school is like the only one in the Mountain West that isn't doing it, what's going to happen in January when the portal opens up again? Gone, right? If you have a place, you're going to be gone. That doesn't apply to everybody. Like, not everyone has a landing place. You just have to look at the portal numbers from the last two. So a lot of people still in the portal didn't find a landing spot. Now, some of them are from lower divisions trying to get up, or their program disappeared. So it's not as, a quick and dirty look at it to get a really good answer. But that's what you're up against, right? They don't have to share 20.5 million. That's just the cap. They also don't necessarily have to tell anybody. Like, there's really no reason, unless eventually you have to report the number because you're a state institution and your budget. We spent $20.5 million on our revenue sharing per the House settlement, and it was split out this way, even though we're not telling you what we gave to WreckTalk specifically. But why, if you're a school, why would you come out publicly and say that we're not doing that number? Because unless all of the athletes in your school program, regardless of sport, get all their data and compare their contracts, no one is going to really know how much they did do, in fact, unless, again, down the road there's public reporting of that money at a top level because of state requirements, or maybe I don't believe there's any aspect of this that we would all know. There's certainly issues that they can go back to the judge, and if parts of the settlement are not followed correctly, they don't pay the back players. If nobody's doing revenue sharing, if all of the kids who lost roster spots are and were now grandfathered in still have no place to go, but other than that, like, why would you tell anybody we're not doing the full revenue sharing? Because you're like revealing everything, you know. I
Yep.
always like when people talk about certain schools paying too much for athletes in the transfer portal, whether those are right or wrong, agents leaking, trying to get better deals. It's the best free advertising for those programs that are supposedly spending too much money, because it
Yep.
tells everybody that those programs have money.
Yeah, for sure.
Whether it's right or wrong, it's like, yes, please tell me that my school X is paying too much for players, because that's really bad. Like, Rec, do you want to go work at a place that pays too much for their employees?
No, and I would love it if Tech, yeah, and they might. Hey, we're doing max revenue share. I think they're positioned to already do that. But there's another important distinction, and you're right. This isn't a requirement. If you were requiring schools to pay this, that would be an unfunded mandate. Again, we're bumping into politics a little. It's not an
Right.
unfunded mandate. Unfunded mandates are almost always an issue. So yeah, you don't have to. And also for the Tech fans listening that wanted to MF Bat on his way out, he was a part of these conversations. He was a big part of these conversations, and he did leave Tech in a position that is ready now, day one, to start hitting the road with what they're gonna do.
Look, I'm not, you know, I'm not a Georgia Tech fan, but I have no hate for Georgia Tech as a school or institution or program. But you know, I thought your AD was pretty good from afar. So for whatever that is or is not worth, it's certainly better than the last AD Miami had before the current one, Blake James, who was like a ticket seller that got the athletic director job ultimately, and is,
You have
you know,
Ratkovich, right? He was at Georgia Tech.
right.
He left. He went to Clemson, and don't need him. What did he do at Clemson? I had 2 national titles in football, yada yada yada. And I think he's doing good things at Miami. Now, Miami's had some situations that are laughable, but as far as your financial situation, I think now it's probably as strong as it's ever been. Am I wrong in saying that?
I think Rad has done some things, and I think he's also on a retirement tour. But I think what he did do was be smart about not talking too much and suing too many people if you're trying to figure out a way to get invited to somebody's house down the road.
Yeah, that's the other thing with Bat. He's going to be his school is going to be a voting member if Tech goes to the Big Ten. So, I mean, I probably wouldn't besmirch the guy.
Yeah. I mean, Miami's president went to UCLA as a president, and I was like, guys, like, be really nice to him on the way out, because he's a vote.
Yeah. Joel S. with a $2 super chat says, just joined Rec. What does this mean for Tech? It means for Tech the same thing that it means for any other school. Tech is going to be able to pay $20.5 million across sports in whatever way they see fit, as we understand it today. Obviously, all of this is subject to change. From what I know, Tech is going to participate in the full revenue share. They were prepared for this well before this settlement came out, as is any school that has any clue what's going on in sports in general. They were prepared for this. So I think overall this is a good thing for Georgia Tech.
I think it is for you guys from a distance. Like, here's one thing to throw out there, and it was mentioned a few weeks ago. There was a whole presentation that basically said the Deloitte guys gave some examples to the commissioners or athletic directors. I don't remember who the meeting was for, but it got widely circulated, that in terms of NIL deals, about 70% of the current collective ones would not pass muster in the NIL Go thing, but a 90% of the private company ones would. So I think that something that for Georgia Tech, as an example, you guys are based in Atlanta, which has many corporate partners there, based right there in a big media market. And I realize that you're competing in the state, you know, with another large SEC program. There's ones around, but the basics of it are you have big companies in market on consumer brands, but also other services that you know, you could tap into better than schools in other markets who are possibly, you know, theoretically bigger brand names, but their, you know, their corporate base is not the same. Remember, alumni issues get scrutinized, you know, booster issues get scrutinized more. So it's not like Phil Knight as you know, Nike can do things as easily direct. He's obviously not this, you know, in charge anymore. He's probably doing things more personal anyway. But there's probably opportunity. There's probably upside once the NIL goes for somebody like Georgia Tech that has a big market and a lot of corporate partners, including consumer-facing ones that advertise to people, not just do business-to-business deals in the background, that you could tap into with the right program around it. And I don't know anything about the state of Georgia Tech's NIL program other than I just know the program's on the upswing. So,
Yeah, from what I can tell, I think they have about $5 million, which is about half, or to a third of top schools, from what I can gather. But I think Tech's in a good spot from two different fronts. One we just talked about, and putting more restrictions on NIL is going to help Tech. It's going to help any team that doesn't have the money that the top dogs do. David Turk asks, as a side note, do college athletes have to state taxes like pro athletes? Anytime you get paid money, you've got to pay taxes on it. Even if it's not income, it's taxed differently. But he says specifically pro athletes pay state income tax in any state that they play a game. I don't know if college athletes pay taxes like pro athletes. You might know better than me.
college athletes do pay taxes at a certain level. However, a number of states have exempted college athletes in their state from having to pay the state portion of taxes on their NIL deals. And it's not just the red states, the football crazy states, so to speak. I think the last one I saw that signed up for that was New Jersey.
Wow.
So, I don't really know how much that might help Rutgers, but if they're doing it, so that's another question, right? Like, you already have states that have taxes and no state taxes, right? So it doesn't even matter. But there are certain states that might have state income taxes that are passing laws exempting NIL for college athletes from being part of that if they do actually have state taxes.
It's interesting. I've brought this up too, and we haven't seen stories on it, but I can guarantee you there's going to be college kids in serious tax trouble at some point if they are not already.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you think about the percentage of regular people who run into that problem, and then you think about the percentage of pro athletes that have a lot of resources and could get the right guidance that run into that problem, just like thinking about, a kid in high school from where you start to spread the tentacles out further and further and more people are involved, and let alone like street agents and all this other crap, right? I'm sure that we're going to hear a bunch of stories that we wish we wouldn't have heard.
Yeah, we've already heard him in the NFL. Like I can't get it out of my head that 30 for 30. I forget the guy's name. He's like, I made $75 million. I spent it on a Hummer.
Yeah, I mean, Hummer, Humvee, whatever.
Yeah. Now, dang, who would not do the full revenue sharing? Obviously, teams that don't have the ability to do the full revenue sharing or not. There's going to be that's going to apply to probably a smaller number of schools, and someone said rest in peace Wake. I don't know if Wake has the money to do that. Anyway.
Well, how about this? Like Oklahoma just had layoffs in their athletic department to try to be ready for what's coming.
Wow.
Now, maybe they just ran their athletic department poorly, but if Oklahoma, taking aside their last year record and their first year in the SEC, but if an SEC school that is at least on paper, at least a middle of the pack brand within that conference, could easily be a top brand in that conference if they get the program back together, right? Coming over from the Big 12. If you're laying off, I don't remember if it was 5 to 15% of their athletic department staff in light of this, what does that mean? Now, maybe it's purely because they're like changing the positions to deal with more of an NFL model and GM and salary cap and all that kind of stuff. So it's just rearranging everything, then maybe it's not a big of an issue. But you would also have thought, like, if they laying off people that were doing certain jobs, that those jobs probably still exist. You're still recruiting. You still got the training table. You still got to sell tickets, right? I just thought that, to me, that's one of the most underreported stories out there is if Oklahoma had to lay off people, and again, I don't know every circumstance, maybe they just were running a really bad program and it was bloated, right? And then it means nothing. But if they are having problems and they had to do that and became public, what does that mean for a lot of other schools? Wake Forest as a great example, as a private institution, much smaller university, but any number of schools, G5 into the certain parts of each of the Power Four conferences. It
makes you think, does it start to normalize coach pay? Because just a cursory look, probably $5.5 million is average coach pay. do they forego some of that pay to have better teams? I don't know.
You would like to think that, I don't think this is going to happen, but imagine if a fierce rival of yours that happens to have the highest paid player in the state of highest paid employee in the state of Georgia cuts a bunch of schools, a bunch of sports because of whatever reasons budgetary, that the last raise that person got could have covered for the year.
Yeah, that'd be Kirby Smart, would be the highest paid employee in the state of Georgia.
That would be Kirby Smart. And again, I don't know that it's going to happen, but in some state that will probably happen, right? Where sports get cut because somebody is making like 8-figure salary as the head coach. And if you just took $1 million away from that person, you could have saved all those sports for the year.
Yeah, and just for the people listening, if you didn't know, anyone that works for the state, you can go look at their pay. I did this when I was a student and I got mad at teachers. I'd look at how much money they were getting paid to make my life difficult, but 100% of their salary is not paid by the state. Part of it will be paid by the state. So I think Paul Johnson was paid like $400,000 when he was here by the state, and the rest is covered by boosters, athletic department, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a combination of how those things can be paid. But again, that's just an example. I'm not even saying that's going to happen. I have literally no idea how Georgia's running their athletic department and whether any sports are in jeopardy. No clue, other than having to adhere to the roster limits that are now part of the House vs. NCAA settlement.
Well, I can tell you this. If a school, especially, of the caliber we're talking about, thinks that cutting, it doesn't matter what's true. If they think that cutting one of these programs will make them more competitive, they will do that.
They will absolutely do it.
I mean, it's not even a debate to be had, which tells me it's going to happen. Andy T says, I'd argue Brent Key is already foregoing money for the roster. I 100% agree. Brent Key, I think, was the lowest paid coach in the ACC for some time. Now he's making somewhere around $4 million, which is probably criminally underpaid for what he's delivered to Tech.
Right.
But, yeah.
Well, Mike Norvell's getting less because he wanted to make sure the program at Florida State had the resources. At least that was the spin on we're cutting your salary because you went 2-10.
Yeah, he'd be fired if his contract was much less. So, I mean,
but there definitely are coaches that give up some. Like there's players that do that. Jalen Brunson for the Knicks notably took less a year ago so that they had more room under the salary cap to try to build players around him. I mean, granted, he's making a ton of money, but there are some people who do that, but they're hard to find.
Yeah. I mean, I think Tom Brady probably did that the majority, if not all of his time with New England. But yeah.
Right. But that was a smart business decision, right? Because all of the halo effect of winning all the Super Bowls gave you so much real, actual name, image, and likeness deal that winning propelled better than how much more money you could get in your salary and not win.
And his lady's still worth more than him. Something else.
There's some things that are always undefeated, WreckTalk.
Well, I had, maybe we'll end the show on this. I had a coach. His name was Hiawatha Berry. He was the punter coach. Special teams coaches are a special breed. If you've ever played football, your special team coaches are usually the most unhinged as far as on your coaching staff, aside from maybe certain defensive coaches. And he's like, well, obviously didn't call me WreckTalk. Rexy, come over here. So let me tell you something. Women have 40% of the wealth in the country and 100% of the poontang. You remember that. And I've never forgotten that. I should have listened more closely, but yeah. That's going to shape your future, young men listening. So you've learned something. Well, where can people find you, man? What do you got coming up? What do you got going on?
You can find me at put a little @ in front of Rock and Rant. That's my normal handle. And then I have a channel with my friend Miami Flow at CFBXPRESS. That's a national channel. We cover pretty much everything from this crap, which I'm oddly fascinated with. But I'm excited, since we already talked about it last night, that our next show is purely about football. And he does a lot of recruiting information and actual gameplay as a former D2 quarterback. And I jump on a show on the College Football Mafia network channel on Sunday nights with this guy named Moen, Moen, at Moen After Dark, and Rec has been a guest on both of those channels, so I always appreciate that.
Yeah, Moen was on College Football Weekly. Rock and Rant's been on College Football Weekly. You don't have to answer now. I know you're a busy man. Love to have you this Friday. I'm kind of behind the 8 ball scheduling that show. There's a lot that goes into producing that show. We're going to have trivia this Friday, college football trivia. So some interesting ones there. Maybe we'll give you 5 to 10 points per. And we got to have someone outside the full win and show up. I think Lou's won twice. Sea-Dog, which was completely unbiased, won.
I mean, listen, I ran back the transcript of the first show I was on to Chat GPT, and it said that I should have actually not come in fourth. So,
did you come in fourth? Wow.
Oh yeah, you like put me out like I was PTI, man.
Well, it's tough. You were on there with Pete and Jackpot, and just like in the real world, other things are at play. I can't speak to it. I would never publicly admit to some of these things, but it is what it is. So,
man, I have another backdrop that has a bunch of logos on a fake wall, and like I said, I can be bought.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, sure. Well, so can I. So if you want to win, you could probably buy a first place spot if you wanted to. So anyways, guys, I appreciate y'all coming on. I appreciate the super chat. So I hope you learned something. I know I learned something being on the show about what's going on, how this is being implemented, what some of the challenges are going to be. And really the biggest thing I learned is I picked the wrong profession. You should be a lawyer. If you want to make the most money or have the most work, I would say probably remember Hiawatha Berry and be a divorce attorney. So we'll see you guys soon. Hope y'all have a great night. Y'all have a good one.